Thank you so very much. Good Shabbos. I hope you're all doing well. Good. And I will try and speak as clearly as I can. I hope you also have access to a Chumash. And if you don't worry. But for those of you who do, you might be interested to follow along. We're going to be talking about something that we didn't get quite to in this morning's Torah reading out loud, but it's found on page 380. It's chapter 12 of the book of Exodus. So if you're interested in following along. So what's going on here in chapter 12? This is actually the first law. Chapter 12, verse 2, this month shall mark the beginning for you, a month of months, the beginning of months. And Rashi acknowledges that this is the actual first law that is promulgated to the Israelite people as such. And why didn't the Bible begin here? He wonders. Why did it begin with Bereshit? And everything that came from Bereshit, and then the beginning, the first 12 chapters of Exodus. I'm not going to talk about that, but anyway, it's an interesting observation. I'm going to talk about a few verses later. So just have that open for yourself. So, though it may feel like it's a long way off, and perhaps to speed your time to a tempted nap, I want to assure you that Kiddush lunch is just around the corner. Plenty of friends and ample food await you. I've been told that there will be tasty things, savory and sweet alike. The food will be so attractive and enticing that you will be tempted to pile it high on your plate. It's not for me or for anybody else to judge how much food you take. We are each responsible to consume what our bodies needs and palates desire. Nor will I ply you with yet another seductive laundry list of foods and nutrients touted by some fad or celebrity. Rather, I want to bring your attention to what you do not eat, to what remains on your plate. Leftovers. Yes, I want to talk about leftovers. Leftovers are foods that could be eaten, but are not, for one reason or another. Most of us do not give leftovers much thought. We toss them into the trash or maybe into the compost and move on with our lives. Some of us, we play with our leftovers, seeing in those cold noodles oodles of entertainment. We stretch them out like quivering worms, or put them in clever little shapes. Or if we're feeling mischievous, like at Camp Ramah Darom, we toss one to an unsuspecting friend. A few of us will still hear our parents or grandparents sharply instruct us, our younger selves, to clean our plates, and the years of guilt pile on as we stare at those crumbs. Many of us squirrel that remaining food into random Tupperware containers and shove them into the back of our fridge, ostensibly earmarked for another meal or snack, but more probably, when we come across its gray fuzz in horror next week, we will toss it into the compost as well. It's been my experience that some foods actually improve as leftovers. Pizza, of course. Indian curries. Peanut butter brownies. Others, not so much with time. Cooked asparagus, sushi, and Ethiopian salads come to mind. I hope you'll agree with me that not all remaining food can be or should be kept. And even if you do not agree with me, Moses does. In fact, he has a great deal to say about leftovers. In this week's Parsha, Moses introduces the idea that the soon-to-be liberated Israelites are to have a ritual celebrating their release from slavery. He repeatedly impresses upon the Israelites that this ritual will indeed occur, and it will unfold in certain ways. I want to look more closely at what he says about this ritual to highlight both his concerns about leftovers and how he deploys several kinds of ethical argumentation to support his concerns. And you can see how this develops in chapter 12 of Exodus. Consider verse 3 of chapter 12. Who would like to read verse 3? This is not a rhetorical question. This is interactive. Please, go ahead.
Speak to the whole community of Israel and say that on the 10th of this month, each of them shall take a lamb to a family, a lamb to a household.
Fantastic. Here, Moses first stipulates that every household is to take a say. It's unclear whether a say is a lamb, a sheep, or a goat. But it probably does not really matter, since each was, in Egyptian culture of that time, considered religiously significant or deleterious. In short, Moses wanted the Israelites to take something symbolically potent and, as we shall see, do away with it. He then makes clear what the Israelites are to do with that animal. They will eat it. And he says in verse 4, please continue.
But if the household is too small for a lamb, let him share one with a neighbor who dwells nearby, in proportion to the number of persons. You shall contribute for the lamb according to what each household will eat.
Already, early in his description of this ritual of liberation, Moses expresses concern about leftover food. While his rhetoric goes as follows, those households that have too few people to completely consume an animal are to partner with a neighbor's house. His logic is the inverse. Since food is not to be left over, households are to team up. The outcome or consequence determines what should be done. Or to put it into ethical language, it is utilitarian logic. The ends justifies the means. Insofar as leftovers should not remain from this ritual, you shall plan ahead to ensure that you have enough people to eat what you are about to prepare. Such utilitarian or consequentialist reasoning is powerful and ubiquitous. We individually use it when we say to ourselves something like, because I'm going to the gym later on, I will have this dessert now. And communally, we invoke consequentialist logic when making policies. For example, the pandemic gave rise to public health concerns justifying mask and vaccine mandates. So too, Moses says, should we use this kind of reasoning when it comes to food, or at least when it comes to this particular ritual, so that leftovers are not left over. Moses goes on in the next verse to insist that the seh, whatever it is, should be without blemish. Please.
Your lamb shall be without blemish, a yearling male. You may take it from the sheep or from the goats. You shall keep watch over it until the 14th day of this month, and all assembled congregation of Israelites shall slaughter it at twilight. Thank you.
That is, when performing this mitzvah, as for any mitzvah, one should offer one's best. The Talmudic rabbis would come to understand this notion as beautify yourself before God in mitzvot. When you make a sukkah, they argued, make it beautiful. When you make a shofar, make it beautiful. When you write out a Sefer Torah, use excellent ink, an exquisite quill, and exceptional handwriting. On this account, doing mitzvot beautifully enhances one's character, indeed, because one becomes closer through it. In ethical language, a person can become even more excellent through careful and deliberately aesthetic effort. This kind of virtue ethic holds that doing this ritual with beauty and flair enhances your righteousness. Moses then stipulates that after keeping watch over this seh for 4 days, all the assembled congregation of the Israelites will slaughter it at twilight. This, if you pause, is an unusual assignment. Let's unpack it in pieces. First, let's talk about pieces. Does Moses really mean that the one seh in each household is to be slaughtered time and time again for as many people as there are in that household? This would mean that each animal is to be hacked into innumerable pieces. Is this really what Moses wants? And insofar as no animal can die multiple times, except for cats, this would be impossible, to say nothing about it being messy and macabre. Surely this instruction should not be followed through according to its plain sense. If we are not to read this verse literally, perhaps a metaphoric approach is apt. This is the strategy the rabbis took. In the Talmud, they extract from this verse the following principle: Shlucho shel Adam k'moto, which means the legal status of a person's agent is like that of the one who sent that agent. This means that the action by my agent or someone whom I have deputized to act on my behalf is equivalent, legally and morally speaking, to my own action. This holds true for individuals as for groups. For example, if a principal, like a community, like this one, selects an individual by appointing or electing that individual, and then sent that person to do something on its behalf, that person's actions would have been the same moral and legal status for the group as well as for the individuals doing that action. This idea about agency is hugely important for society. It allows authorized principals to deputize individuals and institutions to do their bidding. Think of institutions like militaries or police that are authorized by governments to protect their citizens from external and internal threats. Think of individual teachers who are collectively and personally tasked to instruct and train our children to be ready and able citizens. In Jewish contexts, we often rely upon a shliach tzibor, and we had a young lady this morning, an individual in the community whom the community selects to lead prayer and fulfill liturgical obligations on its behalf. And this raises the specter of responsibility. The principal is always liable for what an agent does, for good or for ill. If, for example, I send you to steal something, I am ultimately responsible for that theft, just as you are responsible for doing that devilish job. This kind of vicarious liability ensures that principals refrain from tasking others to do harmful things. In this way, Moses teaches the Israelites that responsibility will flow differently on the far side of liberation. It seems that in their current context, neither Egyptian taskmasters nor Pharaoh, their principal, are held responsible for the harsh treatment inflicted upon the enslaved Israelites. In contexts of liberation, however, Moses insists that principals will also need to answer for the harms they cause via their agents. What this means is that individuals and groups should focus, of course, on not causing or enabling others to do evil, but more importantly, they should focus on keeping their own agency free from moral taint. Everyone is enjoined to keep their proverbial moral houses in order. So when Moses says, "All the assembled congregation of the Israelites shall slaughter the set at twilight," he metaphorically speaks of rules about rules. Or, in ethical language, he speaks of deontology, and specifically agent-centered deontology. While more questions can be investigated about this verse, let's now turn to his next instruction about leftovers. Let's read on to 12:10.
You shall not leave any of it over until morning. If any of it is left until morning, you shall burn it.
Great. This verse has two parts. The first, "You shall not leave any of the animal over until morning," articulates a clear rule that should guide action lechatchila, before the fact. The ideal is what one should intend. That is, even before the ritual begins, you should intend to consume the animal completely so that nothing of it remains when morning comes. This intention is an indispensable part of the overall ritual, and it is buttressed by the notion that the rule itself is promulgated from on high, that it is from an objective, transcendent source to whom our obedience is due. The second part of the verse If any of it is left until morning, you shall burn it, speaks of a contingency norm for b'diavad, for after the fact. Should bits of this say remain in the morning, then you are to burn them all. Of course, before beginning your ritual, you should not intend to have leftovers. Should it come about, however, that some of the animal remains come morning, you have not failed in any significant way. You have not performed the ritual incorrectly or transgressed in some fundamental way. You do not deserve punishment for doing some kind of wrong or harm. Rather, the rule's existence acknowledges the reality that we cannot always achieve our ideals, no matter what our subjective intention or objective rule might have been. In this single verse, Moses articulates a kind of multidimensional pragmatism that John Dewey and colleagues would expand upon about 100 years ago. As Australian scholar Catherine Legge writes, this kind of pragmatism steers ethics between the traditional poles of an objectivism derived from some kind of human transcendent authority and a subjectivism derived from individual preference. Instead of presupposing that ideals will always obtain or that rules will always be followed, notions, to be frank, that serve the interests of elites. This kind of pragmatism that Moses is articulating acknowledges that new circumstances require re-evaluating our values. So in this instance, Moses suggests that no punishment is warranted for those who fail to consume the whole animal. Punishing them or us would only reinscribe the interests of the powerful like himself, and maybe of God too. Rather, the new circumstances that have arisen with the dawn call for a solution that prioritizes values other those than deference to authority. By calling for an action that is compassionate to the two stuffed and very tired eaters who left some sacrificed seh on the platter, Moses not only redirects our conduct to address this novel problem at hand, he promotes a moral theory in which progress occurs when thinking considers interests beyond those of the elites. If I got too wonky just now, it's only because I find this really fascinating. I didn't know when I started this Devar what I would find. But wow, there is so much more here in this ancient text about a ritual we no longer perform that is, surprisingly, and ethically relevant to our lives today. We also struggle with planning, especially when it comes to food. We also worry about having too much or too little food for ourselves and for our neighbors. We think in consequentialist terms, using the desired outcomes to justify our decisions about who to invite, what to serve, and how to eat. We deputize our agents to do our bidding. You cook the casserole, you cook the dessert, and you hold back so that others can have some. And though we have some ideas and ideals about the food we will serve and the foods that we will or will not eat, hopefully we will be compassionate with ourselves should those intentions not obtain. So as we join together in a few moments for Kiddush lunch, I hope you'll enjoy that food in a new way and savor every bite. And should some remain on your plate, that's okay. Don't feel bad, nor should you expect from some punishment from on high. And I hope the rabbis are listening. Since Moses probably said, but it wasn't recorded, leftovers happen. Shabbat Shalom.